In this video, we're going to do a deep dive into the construction of this. And if you're interested in knowing how I came up with the design, the techniques I use to create all the components, the staining process, the poly process, the assembly, then this is the video for you. If you want to see a quick before and after, go check this one out, and then come back to this one. So, without further ado, let's get into this. So I'm starting out, obviously, with the base. And the base, you think, all right, no problem. Just put a basic ladder frame up, and you're done. Not so. It's absolutely critical that your two planes, the bottom and the top, are perfectly in plane with each other or parallel. If they're not, your sliding doors aren't going to slide like they're supposed to. And don't take for granted the space you're in. Make sure you're actually checking for level on your bottom and on your ceiling. Especially in older homes, you're gonna find a problem. You're almost guaranteed. So, in this, you know you're gonna have a problem because this is originally, if you look at the original video, this was a garage at one point. So garages typically have slanted floors so that they can drain all their water as the snow melts off your car. And there was a central drain in the middle of this garage. So we know that this is going to flow that direction. But never, ever assume that your floor is level, is what I'm trying to get at. So what I had to do is I put my standard 2x4 here. I wanted to make sure that when I went to go trim it on a standard 1x4 trim, that I had enough space behind it so that I could get my floor planking in that I want to put in the floor of this cabinet. And so all that is, so 1x4 is the same as a 2x4 in dimension, at least in the 4 aspect of it. So it's 3.5 inches. The material I'm going to put on the floor deck is a 3/4 floor, so therefore I need to subtract 3/4 from that. So I ripped everything down to 2 3/4. Now, I put that 2 3/4 board here, and I put my laser against it, and it showed all the problems. So we have the big slant going that direction. We have undulations in the floor, because whenever the concrete got poured, it wasn't flat. Anyway, so what I ended up doing is long tapered rips to compensate for the room span issue. And then I did some more precision rips to take care of the humps that were in the floor. And all that was just using a tape measure and a laser, identifying where those humps were, putting high point marks, doing taper rips with those with the track saw, and I was all set. So I got this one in, and then it was real simple to set my laser to beam right across the top of this. I made marks across the back one, and no problem. It went right in. So I just did the same thing, long taper rip cuts, and the back one was all set. And I can show you the difference in the floor by showing you underneath the ladder rung. So you can see that gap underneath the 2x. So it's a 3/4 of an inch gap. And on this side of the room, which is the high side, it is 1/4 of an inch gap. So we have a 1/2 inch differential between the two sides. So that's not too bad. And so what that's going to mean for me, floor planking at the right elevation that I want, I'm going to end up having to deck this whole thing with a 1/2 inch plywood, and then I put my floor planks on top of that. That is later on. For now, we're just going to continue framing.
Never break, always fight, never never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life, I never miss, that's fact, taking big swings, each hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light, ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel, I took a red pill, I know life's short so I wanna live real, but how's it supposed to feel? How's it supposed to feel?
This is where I'm at now. I have all the framework up, I have all my dividers up, and my shelf locations don't really matter at this point. So what I want to do now is to wrap everything that I have going on here before we ever get to the shelves. Now the customer did require a certain dimension, a certain size cavity that they wanted to have, so that's going to happen over on this side here. So the center of this, which is right here, isn't exactly in center. When you look at it with a naked eye, you're not going to see the difference. The doors on this side are going to be equal to each other. The doors on this side are going to be equal to each other, and that's important. Now, so what I decided to do to make this, from a utilitarian standpoint, the maximum amount of storage space and still have it really strong, is I built all my walls, my dividers, and my top shelf out of Advantech. So it's 3/4, it's super strong, super stable, and it's gonna be able to work really well. And I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it all with 3/4 tongue and groove, or 1x. And then we're gonna face frame it all, and put a floor in, and put a ceiling in, and all that. And that's what we're doing today. Well, probably for the next couple of days.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life, I never miss, that's fact, taking big swings, each hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light, ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel, I took the red pill, I know life's short so I wanna live real, but how's it supposed to feel?
I'm installing the last board on a ceiling section right up here behind me. And anyone who's ever done any of this sort of work knows that getting that last board in is the most difficult. Now on this side it's 4 1/4 or 4 1/2, and all the way over there is 4 1/4. So the first thing I do is gonna cut it to length, so it's 63 5/8, and then I'm gonna cut that long taper, the 4 1/2 to 4 1/4. Then I'm gonna take my router, and I'm gonna put a 45-degree bevel on this back inside corner. Now this corner is the side that you actually see physically, but this side, if you don't take this little lip off, what's gonna happen is you're gonna put it up against that sheetrock and it's gonna bind. And if you push it through, you're gonna scrape the face of the sheetrock, and now you've got a fixed sheetrock. So just throw a 45-degree bevel on this, easy peasy. The last little thing I do is this inside section here of the tongue and groove, or the groove section, is I make this a 1/16 of an inch thinner so that when the groove comes in, it pops in a lot easier. And now, when I crawl up into this little cubby hole and go to put this thing in, it's gonna pop right in.
They wanna sing my name, but they holding back. They wanna say they hate, but they know it's cap. I ain't play no games, I just do that's fact. And I don't feel no shame, it's a mood you lack. I go crazy, nah, but I ain't lazy. Track after track, I work on this shit daily. Pass me the jack, right, this fool got me hazy. About to unpack all these shit I've been chasing. I've got visions in my head, like memories after death. To be a legend instead of something you can forget. I'm living up every breath, I'd rather lead than be led. I'll fill the seats as I spread, with every word that I've said.
I'm going to walk you through the process of how I make my tongue and groove doors. Now the first thing you have to do is make sure you understand the styling that your customer needs or that you need, and do a basic, if you have to do a sketch, just even on paper, just understand that, you know, the orientations and where the V-grooves are going to be and the design that the customer wants. Now I went ahead and made a design on SketchUp and sent it to the customer, and they said, yep, that's what we want. So now I need to take that design and turn it into reality. So the first step that I always do is obviously understand the sizes that you need, and then do all the millwork, everything. So you're gonna figure out if you need to have a narrow board or a long board or whatever you need to do, and put the additional tongue grooves in that you need for the project. Now let me show you step one for me is I take, it doesn't have to be the number of boards you can be using in that door, but I just sandwich a whole bunch of boards together in the tongue and groove, that way that they're all in line perfectly. And then I go ahead and I mill off one of the 45-degree angles. This is what I'm talking about. So you have your tongue and your groove board, right? And you have a 45-degree bevel and a 45-degree bevel, and this creates an edge groove when you match them all up. Now, I'm going to be having a board go across the bottom here, and I'll mock that up for you. So it's going to look like something like that, right? Now, I don't want to have just a square edge here. I want to have that beveled. So I went ahead and beveled off all the boards so that it'll look like that when I'm done. So the process I use for doing that is really simple, but there's a little trick you've got to be concerned about. That little trick involves this little block. And that guy goes in right there. And let me show you the process. It's a nice clean 45. Now, I'll show you what happens if you don't use this little block. And where I would put the little block to create a tongue, we're not going to put that in. So what happens is when the bearing on the end of the router bit drops into the groove, you get a gouge. And you want to avoid that gouge at all costs. And this is the bearing I'm talking about. So you could get a router bit that has a taller bearing and that would solve that problem, but I don't have that luxury here. So I put in my little block and I just rinse, lather, and repeat. All right, so you have all your lumber milled to length, right? Now you need to figure out the width of your door. So what I've done is I have my big space that I have, the opening, the RO, if you will. I have 2 doors in there and they're gonna bypass. But when they're in their closed position, I wanna make sure that they have an overlap. So I've decided that I wanna have the right side be 32.5 inches and the left side is gonna be 33.5 inches. So that means one of the boards has to be tapered. You could custom make every single board, but that would be way too time consuming. For this job, we're going to do one custom board, and the rest will be the standard 1x6. So the process that I use to do this is I take my 6 boards that are going to be the standard size, and then the one board that's going to be the custom rip I leave out of the pack. Once I have my packs laid out, then I'll get a total width, because this material, even though you go to the lumber yard and you purchase a unit of 1x6 V-groove, every board is a little bit different, and they can vary upwards to 3/16 of an inch. So for each door, because this is very particular, being doors, you want to make sure that you've got it spot on every time. So I'm gonna mock up the width of the door, I'm gonna get my total width, and then I'm gonna go ahead and mill out my last piece. So I have a measurement of 30 3/4. I want to make my door as wide as 33 1/2 is my total width I want the door to be. And the total width is going to be the face value of the boards, so not including the tongue. So I need to go to 33 1/2. So that'll be 2 3/4 inches. So I'll mill up a piece that's 2 3/4. But before you do that, make sure you keep track of your tongue, because we need to keep that tongue. So 2 3/4 would not be big enough. The tongue is typically about 1/4 inch, and this one is. So it'll be 3 inches total on the table saw. So now you see you've got your tongue still, so that's good. And you've got the groove here. Now I got to put a groove here, or a bevel here, and a groove in here. And this piece will be all set. Now I like to do all my operations in order. So if I need to do ripping, I'll do all the ripping. If I need to do beveling, all the beveling, all the grooving. Do it all in one shot. You pick up the one tool, use that tool consistently throughout, then pick up the next tool, and it'll keep your productivity up as high as possible. Especially doing a custom build like this, you've got to look at these little details, and you've got to make sure you keep your workflow as smooth and fast as possible. And now you can see that I have every stack organized. So these are the ones that are 32 1/2. That one's a 33 1/2. So the next pile that I'm putting together will go right there. So I have all my intermediate boards milled out. They're all set. And you can see, got a little break off there. Here's the groove. There's the tongue for the long run. And then you have another groove running here. Now this is what a full-size board looks like. You have your full width, you have your groove, and you have your tongue. And so all I did was the same thing. I just created the same deal. And I didn't use any sort of fancy tools or anything. I did it right here on site. I'm underneath a tent. And this groove here, I created with just the table saw. So I set my table saw at 45 degrees, and I created the bevel. And then I just, inched it over and ran multiple cuts. This took 3 cuts on the table saw. My blade's a little bit worn out, so it wasn't quite an 1/8 inch cut on each one. So I left a little nugget inside. So I went ahead and just made 3 passes and created that. And that was it. Super simple, but it's this little detail here is what makes it allowable for you to make really custom things with pretty simple tooling. So we're through all of our milling, and now we're ready to stain our boards. Now staining, you have to be very particular about how you want the boards to look. If you just want to rush through it and you're not concerned about brush marks or roller marks or any of that stuff, then just go ahead and skip this. But if you're looking to get your boards to look like the tree grew it that color, this is the procedure you should follow. My staining process for these boards has evolved. And what I've learned is the different types of stains that you use can dictate what your process is to get the stain on the board. And you know, I'm always talking about efficiency. So I always think about, you know, how can I get it on there the fastest and still have the highest quality? And what I have figured out is that by rolling it on, I do get all these little bubbles. And that ends up not being a problem with this particular stain. So I experimented. I stained a board, I let it dry overnight with all the bubbles on it, and it turned out just fine for this stain. Other stains I've used, that was a disaster. So you might want to experiment. You know, the night before you're about to stain something, go ahead, take some stain, mix it up, and then get it on your board and see how it goes. But for the minwax stains that I've got 3 different colors in this mix, and it's working out just fine. But there is a procedure behind it. So I just dunk my roller, try to get the dribbles off, get the stain on the board, and I'm moving fairly quickly here. And I go back over it, make sure there's no bald spots or blondes. I'll hit the edges. And I'll go over the top one more time. Now I'll do 2 boards at a time, just as you see it here. And then that way when I do my second coat, I'll hit both boards with that second coat. Now I'm putting very, very little pressure on this. You don't want to be trying to push the stain in. And same procedure again, go over the face and then hit the bevels. And take up the excess from the bevels. I'll hit the second board. Now I'm going to go over it one more time, but very slow. I have no pressure on the roller at all. And then rinse, lather, and repeat. I just want to take a quick break from all the woodworking to show you just how beautiful this place is that I'm working in. And this is the front yard to the customer that we are doing this build in for. And just take a look at that view. My goodness. You got the mountains in the background, the lake's right there. It is a beautiful place, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to work here. Thanks, Jake. All right, next step, get poly on the boards. So the first thing I do is I'll rub it all down with some steel wool. Now I use steel wool instead of sandpaper because it's a much softer material to work with. It's not nearly as abrasive. It will not leave the scratch lines unless you use a really thick steel wool. So I use a fine or a medium. And this will take off everything. All the little ridges left over for some of the bubbles that never popped, or a little excess stain, or if there's a little extra oily sheen in one spot, it'll just dull that right out. And because we are in full bug season, it'll take the bugs off the boards. So that's where I'm going to start. Now if you do rub too much with the steel wool, it will take the stain right off, because it will sand the board. Now you do have to be concerned with the buildup of the stain, and little bits of wood will build up on your steel wool. All you need to do is just flick it against your bench or whatever surface you have available to you, and then it'll knock down a lot of the stain sections. All right, after I do that, I just give it a nice wipe down with a clean rag. Now during the milling process, when I put this bevel on the end of the board, I left some hairs. So I just take my razor blade, I'll just shave those hairs right off the corner. And then that takes care of that. And you want to do that at this phase, because once you put the poly on, the poly is going to act almost like a candy coating. And if it dries with those standing up, yes, you can come back and shave those off, but then you will have raw wood left over and you have to touch it up with some poly. So just identify it now, take them off, and then you're all set. Now another thing that I do is, if you notice in the other section of the video, when I put the stain on, I would spot sand. You know, spots that were damaged or had some stains on them, or you know, whatever I needed to do to clean the boards up. And I didn't sand the entire board. I found that to be a waste of time. Because what happens is, on this particular material, it comes in pretty smooth as it is, and from the milling process. But especially with pine, I mean, all the woods do this, but pine especially, as soon as you get it wet, the little hairs will stand up. And when the hairs stand up, then you're gonna have a super rough board. Like, this is really rough, right? And you come to this, now it's nice and smooth. And all it takes is using a little bit of steel wool, and it'll clean that up for you. So now on every stage after this, so however many coats of poly you put on, you hit it with that steel wool right before you do it, and she's gonna get smoother and smoother and smoother. And so I've done this in several different ways. I had let's just say an old timer taught me that you should take a wet rag and wipe down the board first, get the hairs to stand up, and then you can sand those down, and then once it dries, you can go ahead and put your stain on. Well, I found that to be a complete waste of my time. A great tip, I mean, I learned a lot from it. I learned how to identify what I'm working with and the steps to put in play, but I know that I'm gonna have to hit this anyway with some sort of sandpaper or steel wool, so why do that step? And it gets completely smooth. I mean, you can hear the difference. So that's my recommendation. That's the way I do it. Yeah, so now
now I'm ready for poly. Just like putting the stain on, I'm gonna roll it on. Oh, don't get too nervous now. I know rolling poly on is a big no-no, but it's a heck of a lot faster than brushing it on. So what I do is I just hit it with a brush afterwards. It'll knock out all the bubbles, flatten it down, even it out.
I never miss, that's fact. Taking big swings, put your hand to the bat. Put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag. Cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light. Ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel. I took the red pill, I know life's short.
I'm trying to scrape off all the excess poly off of the brush that I can. I'm not looking to put more poly on. I'm just looking to take out all the bubbles. Because if I were to let this dry the way it is, it'd be a nightmare to sand. You're gonna end up sanding most of it off. Just by taking some slow, light pressure swipes with the brush, you can take all that stuff out. You see how it's all those bubbles right there? And then it goes smooth. One more swipe of the brush and I'll have all those bubbles out.
They wanna say my name, but they holding back. They wanna say they hate, but they know it's cap. I ain't play no games, I just do that's fact, and I don't feel no shame.
So I've been doing 2 boards at a time up to this point, and that is now a problem. The poly is flashing off too quickly, meaning it's drying. So I'm gonna have to only do 1 board at a time from this point forward. Where I live, the temperatures fluctuate a ton. So this morning when I got up, it was 38 degrees, and the high is gonna be 80 something. So I've got to be careful about that, especially with poly. Stain isn't so big of a deal, but poly, yeah, she'll flash off pretty fast. And you don't want it flashing off while you're trying to pull the bubbles out. So this process just got twice as long. All right, now for the shelves. What I've chosen is a backer. It's going to be a 1/2 inch birch plywood. I had to use import because I just can't get domestic right now. And even with that, this stuff was $92 a sheet. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I chose the birch because I wanted a nice clean surface. So if you ever looked up underneath the shelf, you'd see a nice surface. And I'm leaving it the way it is. I'm not going to stain it, because I'm also putting lighting in on this unit, and I want the light to be able to reflect off a nice light surface. Now if you're looking at this unit head on, you're not going to see this at all because of how the face frame is going to work. And you'll see that later. But for now, all I did was rip it down to 24 inches, because that's what I designed this unit to have, is 24-inch deep shelves. And then I measured each bay and verified what those measurements were, and I just cut them to that length. Easy enough. And then I cut a whole pile of the shiplap that's already stained and ready to go. And that's gonna be our surface. And then I just glue it, nail it all up, and she's all good. The only tip I'll give for this is that the plywood, especially the import plywood, tends to have a bit of a bow to her. So after you rip it and you have your piece set, don't assume that it's dead flat. What you want to do is verify if it has a crown or not. And most of these do have a nice crown to them. And you want that crown to be up, so that when you start weighting the shelf, the memory of the plywood is pushing up, where the material you're putting on it is pushing down, and it counteracts. If you were to put the crown down, your shelves are more likely to start sagging. So you want to look at that before you try this. And with that said, I'm going to assemble the last 3 shelves and get on to the next task. Oops. And, you know, be liberal with the glue, like really get it on there. The first few shelves I was doing, I just poured it right out. But that made, you know, a little bit of a mess, and honestly, it was going to consume too much glue. All right, so on your shiplap, you know, you have your grooves on both sides, and so I milled the front of this one off so it's nice and flush. And give it a little shuffle to kind of work that glue in. And all I'm doing is just feeling, make sure it's nice and flush, both on the front. And I put a lot of weight on it. Now you really got to pitch your gun. When you're doing that, because if your nail goes straight in, it's going to blow out the back of your plywood. I'm using an 1.25 inch nail, and so from here to here is only 3/4 of an inch. I can actually 1/2 inch of material that can blow out. So you pitch it, travels through the wood, and it shortens the nail. Sort of. Now, I nail in this surface first, because as it's nailing, it's also driving the board into the other one. And you want to do that to keep this as tight as possible. And I'm not putting a nail here because this knot could potentially blow it out. And then this piece, just mill down the table saw again. And there we go. Everything's all flush and happy. Well, let's see how I did. Not a single blowout. We've started in on the doors, getting them assembled. And the way I'm doing it is I'm putting all the boards out as you see them. And then I need to do some mill work on the edge boards. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting out this little square here. Because underneath here, just like we did on the shelves, I'm putting in the plywood backing. And then the plywood's gonna end right here, and then put in a piece of 3/8 by 1 inch piece of pine that'll go across here, and that's going to cover up all the end grain of the plywood coming this way, because you don't want it to look like plywood. You want to have a nice finished edge on the side of the door. And all I'm doing is using the table saw, which creates all these little tiny rips, and it's really simple. So you can see I cut one for you guys to have a look. And so you set your blade to cut this one. So you set the board up on edge like that, and you make that cut. And then you set your blade to make this cut, and this little guy comes out. Now, you have to be very careful when it comes to these guys, because when this material, so you can grab one here, when it's sitting next to the blade like that, what happens is the blade will pinch it, and it'll shoot it that way. So you never want to be standing in the line of fire. And make sure, you know, your car window or a customer car or whatever is behind you isn't in line of fire. If there is, put up a piece of plywood or whatever you have to put there to catch it. Now, it's just my old tool trailer, so that'll be fine. She can take a hit or two. And another technique that I do is when I get through the board, and because I'm actually milling from this side, right? So as I'm pushing the board through, as soon as she crusts through there, I'm gonna put a little down pressure on the far end, and that will keep this pinched to this. But I still never stand right here. I'll stand off to the side and push it through. That way this guy can come flying out of there and not hit me. Does that make sense? If not, you know, throw a comment down below and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life, I never miss, that's fact, taking big swings, put your hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light, ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel, I took the red pill, I know life's short so I wanna live real, but how's it supposed to feel? How's it supposed to feel? How's it supposed to feel? They wanna say my name, but they holding back. They wanna say they hate, but they know it's cap. I ain't play no games, I just do that's fact. And I don't feel no shame, it's a mood you lack. I go crazy, nah, but I ain't lazy. Track after track, I work on this shit daily. Pass me the jack, right as fuel, got me hazy. About to unpack all these things I've been chasing. I've got visions in my head, like memories after death. To be a legend instead of something you can forget. I'm living up every breath, I'd rather lead than be led. I'll fill the seats as I spread with every word that I've said. How's it supposed to feel? How's it supposed to feel?
So door material's all prepped, and now I'm gonna start working on the face frame. And the face frame is just that. It's what you see directly in front of your face when you're looking at the unit. And it's quite simple. This is the easiest part of the entire project, is face framing. So all I had to do was to do one tapered rip for the bottom of the face frame. So it's 4 5/8 on one end, 3 5/8 on the other, and then that piece is milled, cut the length, all set. I test fit it, looks great. And then the rest of it just 1x4 material. And I have one piece for the head, and that is going to be just a 4 5/8 total rip across the entire thing. And the only step I have to do on top of that is the edge. So all this stuff is machine milled, and it has a very sharp edge on, you know, all the corners. So I do what's called breaking the corner. And all I do, take a piece of sandpaper fold it up so it's nice in my hand, and just sand the edges off until it has a nice round corner. Pretty simple. So I just flip it over and so I can get the other corner here, and then I'll spin it and I'll get the other two corners. When doing this, you've got to really look at the corner. You can see right here, there's a little bit sticking up. If you hit that just right, you'll put a splinter right through that web of your hand. Ask me how I know. Yep. There's another one. So when it gets this bad, what I like to do is I'll just break this stuff off. And then I'll hit it with a little palm sander here. And one more time with the sandpaper. And she's all set. Now it's just after noon, so it should be time to eat lunch, but I'd really like to get this material on the drying racks and then then take lunch. So I think that's what I'm gonna do.
But what we did, once again, I'm just giving you.
All right, so there you have it. Went ahead and stained one edge and the top, and then tomorrow morning I can flip them over. I'll get the other edge and the bottoms. And this racking system that I use makes this job super simple. And all it is furring strips cut in 4-foot lengths and little chunklets of 2x4 screwed in. Very simple, and you can stack it up pretty much as high as you want. You have to put some bracing in if you get too high, but at this level, no problem. All right, everyone, she's finished. I apologize I wasn't able to get all the footage for doing the face frame and hanging the doors, but I really needed to get this project done today. The customer's showing up here shortly, and I just needed to get it done. So, I'm sorry, but if you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask. I'd love to show you, maybe in a different video, or just answer your questions down in the comments. But without further ado, let's show you how it turned out. I use full ball roller bearings in the track system. The shelves are fully adjustable, so you just have your normal pegs inside. The top section here is all open. That side is a mirror image of this side. The customer is still deciding what they want to do for door pulls and if they want me to track the bottom. Over here we have a little access hole for an electrical outlet that's still in that wall. They didn't want it inside the cabinet itself, so I just put a little access door. Keep it simple. And then on this side, this section here is identical to those. Same amount of shelves, same open space. And then this side is open for large ladder or folding ladders and that sort of thing. I did put LED lighting in the cabinet. One of them was shorted out. It only lit like a third of the way, so we pulled that one back out. And the customer's deciding on what they want to do for running the wires. So I don't have those set up, but I think I've got a photo of it. I'll show you. And that's it. Took a couple weeks, 3 weeks actually, to do this, but turned out slick. Taking care of all the slants and the taper rips and all that stuff in the beginning makes all the difference when it comes to hanging your doors. It didn't take me long at all to set these doors. No shimming needed, no extra steps. You just hang the doors, minor adjustments, and you're done. But if you got any questions at all, please feel free to ask, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.